Right, so get this. We're diving into the life of a guy, Marwan Koukash, who's had these like crazy highs and lows. Like, is he a total genius in the business world with a good heart, or is he more like a smooth operator who leaves a mess everywhere he goes?
See, that's what's so interesting about Kukash. He's like this perfect example of where ambition and taking risks and maybe pushing things too far all kind of blur together.
Exactly. We've got like a mountain of stuff to go through. Wikipedia articles from the BBC about his time owning a rugby team, even reports from horse racing magazines.
Because, yeah, he was a big deal in that world, too.
Oh, yeah, huge.
Yeah.
So these sources, they show a guy who really seemed to love the spotlight, whether it was in business, sports, or even just, how he named his racehorses.
Definitely seemed to enjoy the attention.
Okay, let's start with the basics. Koukash was born back in 1958 on the west bank of the Jordan River.
Okay.
But get this. His family had to flee to Kuwait when he was just a kid because their farm got bombed in an Israeli airstrike.
Wow, imagine being 8 years old and having to leave everything behind. Like, that has to change the way you see the world, especially when it comes to risk and reward.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it makes his success even more incredible. The family eventually moved to the UK, and Koukash ended up earning a PhD in electrical engineering from Liverpool John Moores University.
That's not just bouncing back, that's like launching yourself into a whole other level. We're talking about a refugee who not only rebuilt his life, but like thrived in a super competitive field.
Yeah, and he was even appointed director of international business at the university. But Koukash wasn't content with just being an academic. He wanted more. He went on to become a millionaire through all these different businesses he started, including owning hotels that were operated by Hilton.
And that's where you start to see that drive, that relentless ambition. I mean, he wasn't afraid to branch out to try new things.
So that leads us to what some of our listeners might know him best for Koukash's wild ride in the world of rugby league. In 2013, he bought the Salford City Reds, later renamed the Salford Red Devils.
Buying a struggling sports team, that's a pretty classic move for someone like Koukash. Someone who's already made a ton of money and wants a new challenge, maybe a new way to be in the public eye.
It seemed like he loved it.
Yeah.
He rebranded the team, signed a bunch of new players, even talked about making them the biggest club in Super League. But then things took a bit of a turn.
Yeah, remember what we said about risk? Well, in 2014, Koukash got fined by the Rugby Football League for misconduct. It's almost like he was pushing the limits, seeing how far he could go.
And it didn't stop there. In 2016, Salford got hit with a salary cap breach. Now, for those who don't follow rugby, a salary cap is basically a limit on how much a team can spend on their players.
It's supposed to keep things fair so you don't have the richest teams just buying all the best talent.
Right, level playing field.
Hmm?
But then Koukash was really insistent that Salford hadn't broken the rules on purpose. He said it was an accounting error.
And that's where it gets tricky. Was it a genuine mistake, or was he trying to pull something sneaky? It's tough to say for sure, but it definitely hurt his reputation in the rugby world.
For sure. And it wasn't just a small thing either. Salford got hit with a huge fine, and they even got points deducted, which messed up their position in the league.
Makes you wonder if maybe Koukash's ambition, that desire to win no matter what, maybe it clouded his judgment. Do you think he might have pushed the team to find ways around the rules, even if it meant bending them way too far?
It's something we see a lot on Grifter or Gifted. That line between pushing limits and straight-up cheating can get really blurry.
Yeah, and a lot of times it boils down to intention. Was Koukash deliberately trying to trick everyone, or was he just so fixated on his goals that he didn't think about the consequences?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, we can't read his mind. But we can look at what he did and try to figure it out.
Exactly. And when you put this incident next to all his other controversial moves, the fines for misconduct, the sudden leaving of Salford, and then the eventual bankruptcy, it's hard not to notice a pattern.
It really is like he was playing this high-stakes game, pushing his luck again and again until it ran out.
And the thing is, it wasn't just his luck that was on the line. His choices had a real impact on the people around him, the players, the staff, the fans who all believed in what he was doing.
So as we try to wrap our heads around this complicated guy, Marwan Koukash, where do you think he falls on the grifter or gifted spectrum?
It's tough, isn't it? He's a complicated guy who had amazing success, but also left behind a lot of chaos and broken promises.
It's like this classic example of how charisma and ambition can be both powerful forces for good and really dangerous tools for taking advantage of people.
I think the big takeaway here is that success isn't just about how much money you have or how many times you win. It's also about doing things the right way, respecting the rules, and thinking about how your actions affect other people.
And in the case of Marwan Koukash, it seems like those things might have gotten lost somewhere along the way, as he chased bigger, bolder, and ultimately riskier things.
So what do you think, listeners? Is Marwan Koukash a visionary who just got a little too close to the edge, or a con artist who finally got what was coming to him? We'll let you think about that one. Join us next time as we keep breaking down the motivations and legacies of today's most controversial figures right here on Grifter or Gifted.
Feels like we're trying to put together a puzzle where half the pieces are missing and the ones we do have don't really fit.
Yeah, and that just makes it even more interesting. It's tempting to try and categorize him, like is he a visionary or a con artist?
Yeah.
But it's just not that simple.
He definitely knows how to grab people's attention, that's for sure. Whether it's with these huge business deals or, naming a racehorse Lexi after your daughter.
Yeah. Speaking of those horses, how his whole horse racing thing fell apart, that's worth taking a closer look at. Did he spend way too much on those horses and that's what caused him to go bankrupt? Or were there other problems with his businesses?
Well, we know he said he was the biggest racehorse owner in all of Britain, and those horses aren't cheap to take care of. But it's hard to separate his love for racing from his business decisions.
Right, and that blurring of lines, that's something we see all throughout Koukash's story. It's like he approaches everything with the same intensity, this need to be the best, the biggest.
But remember that massive debt he wrote off for the Salford Red Devils right before he went bankrupt? That just adds another layer to this whole money mystery.
It's a move that could be seen in a few different ways. Could it have been him trying to be clever with his money, trying to reduce his assets before the bankruptcy officially happened?
Or was he actually being generous, trying to help the team out, even when his own finances were a mess?
It's really hard to say without knowing more about what his finances looked like back then. But it just shows how Koukash's actions always seem to leave us with more questions than answers.
And that's what makes him such a perfect subject for Grifter or Gifted. We're trying to figure out, is he driven by this desire to build something that lasts? Or is it all about what he can get out of it, even if it means other people lose out?
Exactly. Because someone who's a true visionary, they don't just dream big, they also think about what's going to happen in the long run. They get that success isn't just about getting rich, it's about creating something that helps other people too.
So then how do we explain those times when he seemed to be really generous, like writing off that debt, with those accusations of him making reckless financial decisions and not caring about the rules?
Well, we have to remember that people are complicated. Even someone who does shady things can also be capable of doing something kind.
It's like that saying, every saint has a past and every sinner has a future.
Exactly. But when we're trying to figure out if someone's a grifter or gifted, we need to look at how they act overall.
Are they always putting themselves first? Are they leaving a trail of broken promises and unpaid bills? Or are they actually trying to do some good in the world, even if they mess up sometimes?
It's about looking past the flashy stuff. A lot of people can talk a good game, but it's what they do that shows what they're really all about.
And when it comes to Koukash, what he did paints a pretty messy picture. There are times when he seems brilliant, when he's genuinely generous, but then there's also the impulsiveness and the feeling that he doesn't really care about the rules.
And that brings us back to the big question. Is Marwan Koukash a visionary who just went too far, or is there something more sneaky, more selfish at the heart of his story?
To answer that, we need to dive a little deeper into the world of rugby league and those controversial decisions that got Koukash into so much trouble.
Right, because those incidents, especially that salary cap thing, they give us some clues about how Koukash does business and how far he's willing to go to get what he wants.
Okay, so let's break down exactly what went down with that salary cap breach and what it tells us about how Koukash thinks. All right, so let's go back to 2016 when Salford got hit with that salary cap breach. For those who need a refresher, it means they were spending more money on players than the league allowed.
Yeah, it's meant to keep things fair so you don't have just the teams with the most money snatching up all the star players.
Right, it's all about having a level playing field. But here's the thing. Koukash was really insistent that Salford hadn't broken the rules on purpose. He said it was all down to an accounting error.
And that's where things get kind of fuzzy. Was it a real mistake, or was he trying to pull a fast one? It's hard to say for sure, but it definitely did some damage to his reputation in the rugby world.
Yeah, and it wasn't just a slap on the wrist either. Salford got hit with a big fine and even had points taken away, which really hurt their position in the league.
It does make you wonder if maybe Koukash's ambition, his wanting to win no matter what, maybe that affected his judgment. Do you think he might have pushed the team to find ways to get around the rules, even if it meant bending them way too far?
That's something we see a lot on Grifter or Gifted. That line between pushing the limits and straight up cheating it can get really blurry.
For sure.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it comes down to intention. Was Koukash trying to trick everyone, or was he just so focused on winning that he didn't think about the consequences?
It's the big question, isn't it?
Mm,
Unfortunately, we can't read minds, but we can look at what he did and try to make sense of it all.
exactly. And when you put this incident together with all the other controversial stuff, the fines for misconduct, the sudden leaving of Salford, and then, of course, the bankruptcy, it's hard not to see a pattern there.
It really does seem like he was playing this high-stakes game, pushing his luck further and further until it finally ran out.
And the thing is, it wasn't just his own luck that was at stake. His choices affected the people around him, the players, the staff, the fans who all believed in him.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the mystery that is Marwan Koukash, where do you think he lands on that grifter or gifted scale?
Oh man, that's a tough one. He's a complicated guy who achieved a lot of success, but also left a lot of chaos and broken promises in his wake.
Yeah, it's a classic example of how charisma and ambition can be these powerful forces for good, but also dangerous tools for taking advantage of people.
I think the big takeaway here is that success shouldn't just be measured by money or wins and losses. It's also about doing things the right way, respecting the rules, and thinking about how what you do affects the people around you.
And it seems like in Marwan Koukash's case, those things might have gotten lost along the way as he chased after bigger and bolder and riskier things.
So what do you think, listeners? Is Marwan Koukash a visionary who flew too close to the sun, or a con artist who finally got what was coming to him? We'll leave you to think about that one. And join us next time as we keep breaking down the motivations and legacies of today's most controversial figures right here on Grifter or Gifted.